The bird ran past the first spring, and the young hunter chose pride over warning. Weary ran after the emu. Hot wind scraped his throat, and the smell of salt drifted inland from the coast. Ahead, the bird staggered through dry grass with his spear lodged high in its side. Behind him, his uncle shouted his name once, then no more. That silence pressed harder than the heat. In Kurna country, old people did not waste breath on a warning twice. Weary knew the rule of the dry months. Leave the emu alone when the springs sink low and the earth cracks at the edges. Yet the stone knife at his belt had made him bold. His grandfather had passed it down at dawn, wrapping it in kangaroo skin dark with age. The blade held a gray shine like storm light on rock. Old Marapi had touched Weary's wrist and said, "This knife belongs to Tjirbruke before it belongs to you. It cuts meat, wood, and pride. Use it with listening." Weary had bowed, but his chest had filled with heat. He had tracked wallaby since boyhood. He could read bent grass, fresh dung, and broken bark faster than many older men. When he saw the emu at the edge of the spinifex that same afternoon, broad-backed and careless, he thought only of his aim. Now the bird crossed the first sacred spring and did not fall. Weary stopped on the white crust at its edge. The water below looked low and thick, and flies clung to the damp stones. The emu turned its long neck, fixed one bright eye on him, and ran on as if it wanted him to follow. Weary gripped the stone knife. The elders said Tjirbruke wept springs into this coast when grief walked with him. If that was true, why had the knife come to Weary on the same day as this broken rule? He stepped over the spring and kept chasing. The first spring runs bitter. The emu led him south along the line of the coast, where the land lifted and broke into limestone shelves. It did not run like a dying thing. It kept a steady pace, leaving dark drops on stone and sand. Each mark pulled Weary onward. One spilled bowl told the hunter what no one needed to say. By sunset he reached the second spring. Women from a nearby camp stood there with kulamans in their hands, waiting to fill them. When they saw the blood on the emu's trail, their faces changed. No one shouted. One woman only tipped her bowl and let the little water inside spill back into the earth. That small sound struck Weary harder than a blow. Her child stood beside her, lips dry and split, watching the water vanish into the dust. The child did not cry. He only rubbed his tongue against his teeth and stared at Weary's spear. Weary lowered his eyes and moved on. The emu had crossed the spring, and old law said blood should not touch those waters in the hungry months. He told himself the wound was light. He told himself he would finish the bird quickly and return before night deepened. The country narrowed between sea and stone. Moonlight laid a pale skin over the dunes. Weary found the emu's prints near a patch of samphire, then lost them where the ground turned hard. He knelt and pressed his fingers to the earth. The sand still held a little warmth, but another track cut across the bird's path. Human footprints, bare feet, large, calmly placed, heel to toe, as if someone had walked there after sunset with no fear of snakes, no haste, no burden. Weary followed them to a flat rock above the surf and found nothing except a line scratched into the stone. It was not a hunter's mark. It curved like a tear. A wave broke below, and cold spray touched his face. He remembered the story spoken around winter fire. Tjirbruke carrying grief southward, his tears opening fresh water where thirst had ruled. As a child, Weary had listened with his head on his mother's knee. He had pictured a great man, not a lonely one. Now he heard footsteps behind him. His uncle Badu emerged from shadow, his hair tied back with reed fiber, his breathing steady despite the climb. He did not look at the sea. He looked at the scratch on the stone. "You crossed the first spring," Badu said. Weary swallowed. "I can still set it right. Can you pull blood from water once it sinks?" Weary had no answer. Badu came nearer and touched the stone knife at Weary's belt with 2 fingers only, as if it carried heat. "Your grandfather gave you that blade because your hands are quick," Badu said. "He feared your ears were not." He crouched and traced the footprint in the sand. Country speaks before old people do. When birds feed close to sacred water in dry time, they stand under protection. A hunter who cannot read that sign hunts himself. Weary felt anger rise because shame had reached him first. The emu was there. My spear flew true. Badu stood. A straight throw can still bend a family. Come back now. At dawn we will make offering at the spring and ask if the water will hold. Then the emu cried out from the dark beyond the dunes. It was not the sound of panic. It was sharp, almost calling. Weary turned before he thought, and that one movement chose the next hours for him. He ran again. Behind him, Badoo did not follow. Footprints beside the salt wind. By morning the chase had pulled Weary far from camp. The coast opened wide, bright under a hard sky. Salt smell rode the wind, and gulls circled above the surf. He found the emu near a stand of low tea tree, standing in plain view. Along the salt wind, each track said the country had been speaking all along. The spear still sat in its flesh, yet the bird did not sag. It watched him, then walked away with solemn steps. Weary moved after it, slow now, afraid to throw again. Each time he thought he had gained ground, the emu passed over another spring or another damp hollow tucked between stones. At the third spring he saw his mother. Mina had come with other women and 2 boys carrying bark vessels. She knelt beside the water, scooped once, smelled it, and set it down untouched. Her shoulders tightened beneath her possum skin cloak. When she rose and saw Weary across the clearing, she did not speak his name. That hurt more than anger would have done. She walked to him, took the stone knife from his belt, and held it flat across both palms. "Your grandfather cut your first meat with this blade," she said. "When fever took your sister, he scraped roots for broth with it through the night. A knife keeps life before it takes life. Did you forget whose hands carried you?" Weary opened his mouth, then closed it. He could still smell the broth from that old night, bitter root and smoke. He had been small, half asleep, watching his grandfather work while his mother cooled the girl's head with wet leaves. The memory came like a hand on the back of his neck. Mina gave the knife back. "Do not make me choose between my son and water," she said. She turned away before he could answer. The boys lifted the empty vessels. No one drank. The emu's track bent inland. The soil changed color, turning dark red under Weary's feet. Grasshoppers flicked across his path. Heat rose from the ground in visible shivers. By noon his mouth felt lined with dust. At a ridge of broken stone he found the bird's blood gone. Not less. Gone. Only prints remained, deep and clear, beside the same human footprints from the night before. Weary stared until his skin tightened. He did not like fear, so he named it hunger and walked on. The footprints led to a leaning rock marked with old ochre. There a small lizard lay still in the shade. Beside it sat a shell full of fresh water. No spring showed nearby, no camp smoke rose, yet the shell brimmed clear. Weary looked around and saw no one. At last he lifted the shell and held it close. His throat burned for it. Then he noticed another thing. The lizard's mouth had been gently wetted, as if someone had offered the smallest creature a share first. He set the shell down untouched. That choice cost him. His tongue felt thick, and his legs shook when he stood. Still, something inside him had shifted, though only a little. The old law no longer sounded like a fence built to stop him. It sounded like a path he had once known and somehow stepped off. Toward evening he reached a cliff path where the sea flashed below. There, on a slab of rock, stood the emu. Wind combed its feathers. The spear had vanished. No wound showed. Weary stopped at once. The bird stared at him, then stamped once beside a narrow crack in the stone. Water glimmered far below in the cleft. Fresh water. Weary climbed down carefully and cupped the pool in both hands. It tasted cold, with a trace of stone and leaf. He drank only 2 mouthfuls and sat back, shaken. No one had told him of this place. Yet the emu had led him there and waited until he found it. When he climbed up again, the bird was gone. In its place lay one gray feather caught under a pebble shaped like a tear. The rock that held tears. Weary returned toward camp in darkness, carrying the gray feather in his hand. He no longer hunted. He listened. Frogs called from one hidden hollow. Night insects rasped in the scrub. Each sound seemed placed with care, as if the land arranged its own speech for those who slowed enough to hear it. Before the marked stone, the blade lost its pride and the rock answered in drops. Near dawn he saw smoke. Men and women stood in a half-circle around the first spring. No one cooked. No one laughed. Badoo stood beside old Merope, who leaned on his digging stick and watched the water. Weary approached and placed the feather at his grandfather's feet. Old Merope looked at it for a long time. "You reached the cliff spring," he said. "The emu took me there." "No," Merope said, "it allowed you there." The spring below them had turned cloudy. Not ruined, but wounded. A bitter smell rose from it, sharp as crushed shell. Mina stood with folded arms, and her face held the strain of a sleepless night. Beside her, children waited with empty vessels. Weary felt the eyes of his people on him. Shame can make a man crouch or stand straight for the first time. He chose to stand. I crossed the spring after I threw the spear, he said. I chased what I had no right to chase. If water leaves us, let the blame sit on my head. No one answered at once. The sea wind moved through the reeds. Then Merope lifted his chin toward the south. There's one place left for truth, he said. Come. They walked in a small line along the coast until the sun stood high. At last they reached a dark rock face split by old weather. Thin lines ran down it like dried streams. Weary had seen the place before as a child, but never in silence. Today no one spoke above a murmur. Merope touched the stone with his palm. Tjirbruke grieved here, he said. People speak of springs and forget the sorrow that opened them. Water is not a trick for clever men. It rises where grief, duty, and memory meet. He stepped aside, laid down the knife. Weary's hand went to his belt at once, then stopped. The blade had belonged to his grandfather, and before that to his grandfather's kin. It had cut food for the hungry. It had carved wood for shelters. If he surrendered it, he might never carry it again. He thought of the child at the second spring rubbing a dry tongue against his teeth. He thought of his mother smelling water she could not trust. He thought of the shell beside the lizard, where some unseen hand had placed the weakest life first. Weary drew the knife. Sunlight touched the edge, and the old gray shine flashed like moving water. He knelt before the rock and set the blade down on a ledge streaked pale with salt. His fingers lingered one breath longer than they should have. Then he pulled them away. Nothing happened. The people behind him shifted. Heat pressed on his shoulders. For one sharp moment he feared he had given up the knife for empty air. Then a drop formed on the rock above the blade. It slid down slowly, gathered at the tip, and fell to the ledge. Another followed, then another. The children gasped. Mina covered her mouth with her hand. Badou closed his eyes. Water traced the old lines in the stone until they darkened. It did not pour like rain. It wept, yet each drop struck the rock with a clear sound. Merope bowed his head, not to the knife, but to the place. Weary felt his own eyes burn. He did not hide it. Until that moment he had thought wisdom meant seeing farther than other people. Now he understood something smaller and harder. Wisdom began when a man admitted that country had seen farther than him all along. Merope picked up the knife, wrapped it in kangaroo skin, and did not hand it back. When the emu stood at dawn, they camped near the rock that night. No feast marked the change. No one sang loud. The people drank in turn from a basin filled drop by drop, careful and grateful. Water touched cracked lips, dry tongues, the corners of children's eyes where dust had gathered. Simple acts carried more weight than praise. At first light, the bird returned to the water, and no one lifted a spear. Weary sat apart with Badou while a small fire breathed red between them. Smoke smelled of tea tree and ash. For a long time his uncle fed thin sticks into the coals and said nothing. At last Badou spoke. When I was younger than you, I broke a nesting ground for eggs before the proper time. I thought hunger excused haste. He turned one stick in the fire until its tip glowed. My father made me carry the broken shells for 2 days. Not as punishment, so I would hear them knock together each time I moved. Weary looked at him. It was the first time Badou had offered failure instead of judgment. That gift settled between them with the warmth of the fire. What did you hear? Weary asked. Badou gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. My own noise. Too much of it. He nudged the coals. You have skill. Keep it. But skill without listening is a spear thrown at water. Weary nodded. He did not defend himself. The night no longer needed that. At dawn the people returned to the first spring. Mist sat low over the reeds. The bitter smell had thinned. Merope knelt, dipped his fingers into the water, and touched them to his tongue. He waited, then smiled without showing teeth. The line of his shoulders changed first. Everyone saw it. Relief moved through the group not as noise, but as breath. Mina filled one vessel and gave the first drink to the dry-lipped child from the second spring. The child's eyes widened. Water ran down his chin. Only then did Merope turn to Weary. He held out the wrapped knife. Weary looked at it but did not reach. Keep it, he said quietly. Not because I refuse the burden. Because I have not finished earning the right to carry it. Merope studied him, then tucked the bundle under his own arm. A man who can wait may one day hold it well. A rustle sounded from the grass on the far bank. Heads turned. An emu stepped into the pale morning light. Its feathers shone soft brown and gray. No spear marked its side. No blood touched the reeds. It stood still long enough for all to see, then lowered its head and drank. No hunter moved. The bird lifted its neck, looked once toward Weary, and walked away along the edge of the spring. Its feet left clean prints in damp soil. Weary watched until the grass hid it. Then he picked up the empty vessels and began the walk back beside his mother. He noticed things he had rushed past before: the sweet rot of wet reeds, the tiny claw marks of water birds, the way salt crust broke under careful steps. When Mina stumbled on a stone, he steadied the vessel, not her arm, and she gave him a brief nod. By the time the camp came into view, the morning had grown bright. Children ran ahead with water. Dogs barked. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Life had returned to its tasks, but not as if nothing had happened. The country had spoken, and this time Weary had heard enough to fall silent. Years later, when boys asked him about the cliff spring or the rock that wept, he never began with the knife. He asked first what the wind smelled like that day, whether the birds had fed near water, whether the reeds stood straight or bowed. If they answered too fast, he sent them back to look again. Some smiled at his caution. Some grew impatient. Weary did not mind. He had once believed wisdom sat in the hand that struck first. Now he knew it often waited in the step withheld, the water shared, the track read properly before dawn had burned it away.